Thank you so much, Maureen, and welcome to everybody. It's a wonderful occasion. As Maureen said, my colleagues Tully and Heather very graciously agreed to let Durban Holocaust and Genocide Centre host this evening because it is actually a national event. But in light of the fact that Rochy is one of us, a Durbanite, irrespective of how long you've lived in Brisbane and how many times you visit Florida, I'm sure Rochy you'll agree, but Durban stays within all of us. So it's wonderful to have you here with us, Rochy, and to have the opportunity to hear a little bit about why you went this path of creating a magnificent publication to memorialize and to share the story of your wonderful mother, Lea Leibowitz. I remember her visits to Durban, and I did meet her on more than one occasion very briefly, but I remember from many friends, particularly Leslie, who's on the call tonight, how much she meant to your friends who met her while they were in Durban. So to all of you, we're very, very thrilled to have you. We want to give as much time to Rochy as possible to share her details. And as I mentioned, there will be questions afterwards and time to chat. And I see Alan Fine is challenging me that Rochy is actually a Benoniite. So we'll have to have that out on another occasion in the chat, Alan. But in the meantime, Rochy, you belong to all of us. We're thrilled to have you, and over to you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Before I begin, I want to say that this feels in a little way like coming home. I left South Africa in 1991, a year after my mother left, and yet my entire childhood and early adulthood and my mother's entire post-Holocaust adulthood, except for the last 10 years of her life, was spent in South Africa. Not only spent in South Africa, but actively engaged with the Jewish and Holocaust communities in many of the cities of South Africa over that entire period. My mother was involved in everything related to the Holocaust, be it the Sherit HaPleta, the initial establishment of Yad Vashem in South Africa, the Melata Society, lecturing to students and groups at schools or youth movements, addressing the annual Holocaust memorial services at West Park Cemetery, or studying for a PhD in Holocaust literature at Wits University. My mother's life was intimately intertwined with every facet of Holocaust commemoration in South Africa. So to have written this book, her memoir, and not have it as a physical presence in South Africa, which was such an integral part of our lives, felt like a gaping omission. Thanks to the Holocaust Centre, who've so kindly hosted this launch, to Mark Sandler, who so willingly printed the paperback version of my book, now available in South Africa, and to my always supportive friend, Linda Sandler, who's done so much to help me distribute the books, I'm more than delighted to say that this missing link has now been completed. So let me start at the beginning. At this moment in time, you and I are on different continents, different countries, in different time zones, but what we share is our history and our heritage. And we are here today to share an experience that honors that heritage and ensures our history is remembered. I'm here today to talk to you about a remarkable woman, somebody whose normal life was totally decimated for the years between 22nd of June 1941, when she was incarcerated, first in the Kovno ghetto and then in 5 concentration camps in Estonia and Germany, until she was liberated on the 15th of April 1945 from Bergen-Belsen. But what I want to focus on today is not the horror of that time, nor the terrible devastation and loss that she and so many like her suffered, but the bravery, humanity, and optimism that helped her to survive and allowed her to emerge from that dark period as a whole, accomplished exemplary human being. Someone who went on to dedicate her life to perpetuating the memory of the Holocaust, to educating everybody she could, and to ensure that the lessons of that time would never be forgotten. I want to tell you about somebody who was simply an incredible person, whom I was privileged to have as my mother. For those of you who don't know me, let me tell you a little about me. My name is Rochy Miller. I was born in South Africa and I emigrated to Australia in 1991, where I live with my husband. I have two married children, one of whom lives in Australia, the other in Florida with her husband, and my two gorgeous granddaughters. I'm a retired medical doctor, and I also have a degree in journalism, and I've recently published this book, which is a memoir about my mother's life. My mother, Lea, was born in Lithuania in 1914. From the outset, by all accounts, she was special. She was exceptionally smart. She studied at the University of Kovno at a time when most women didn't complete high school. And she had a degree in natural sciences and taught at a Hebrew high school. My mum was fluent in at least 7 languages, and she could communicate in many others. She was learned, gregarious, and a loving family member. This is a family photo of my mum as a teenager with her parents and younger siblings. They lived in Malat, which was a small town in Lithuania, where her parents had a bakery and a restaurant. She also has an older brother, Jaime, who migrated to South Africa in 1926. In 1937, she married Moses Klompus, and a year later they had a son, Michael. They lived a relatively normal family life in Kovno, which was the capital of Lithuania. In 1940, Lithuania was invaded by Russia, and there was a non-aggression pact signed between Russia and Germany. As a result of this document, the Lithuanian Jewry had a false sense of security that despite the impact that Germany was having in other parts of Europe, they felt they were safe. And then on the 22nd of June 1941, everything changed. Germany invaded Lithuania. These were her words. You can imagine, we were sitting peacefully on a Sunday, a sunny Sunday morning in June. Because Russia and Germany have got a non-aggression pact and Lithuania is ruled by Russia, we think we are quite safe. But then we see at about 12 o'clock in the morning, German planes attacking Kovno. Bombs were all the time just booming. That is all we heard. And from that very minute, we could already not get out into the street because we were straight away arrested or taken away to be shot. From this moment, all the Jews in Lithuania ceased to be normal members of the country where they had been born, where they had lived and worked and identified as citizens. Many of them were murdered by their Lithuanian neighbors and the German forces in the first few days of occupation. Those who survived this initial onslaught were forced into the ghetto, where every liberty was curtailed. Despite this, my mother and her husband and child and her mother-in-law remained in the ghetto as a family for 15 months, and they counted themselves lucky. They had work and they were together. Against all odds, they survived selections and hunger and brutality. And then in October 1942, the Nazi authorities issued a demand for 2,000 men from the ghetto to be sent to Estonia. The Judenrat provided a list, and my mother's husband's name was on it. There was an offer for the men's families to go with them. If they agreed, they were promised that they could continue to live together. And after much agonizing, they decided to go to Estonia together as a family. But it was a cruel hoax. As soon as they reached the station, the family was separated. My mother was sent to one concentration camp in Estonia, her husband to another, and her not quite 5-year-old son and his grandmother were sent to Auschwitz, and my mother never saw them again. My mother spent almost 3 years in 5 different concentration camps. These were Vaivara, Erida, and Lagedi, which were all in Estonia, and then by transfer to Stutthof in Germany, she went to a camp in Ochsenzoll, which was an offshoot of the infamous women's camp Ravensbrück. It was close to Hamburg. And finally, she was sent to Bergen-Belsen, where she was liberated on the 15th of April 1945 by the Allied forces. These details are described in this document that I found, entitled The Story of My Life. It's dated the 14th of February 1946, so it was written 10 months after liberation, while she was living and working in Bergen-Belsen's displaced persons camp. The first concentration camp she was sent to was Vaivara in Estonia. After the initial devastation of being separated from her family and the incredible dehumanization and humiliation that she endured, her resilience emerged, and she began to hone her amazing coping skills. In Vaivara, she worked in the barracks, having to clean the squalid living quarters of 100 women who shared 20 bunks and were locked in overnight with no toilet facilities. And every morning, the couple would come to collect 60 or 70 of the women from the barracks for forced labor. Frequently, he'd beat them when they wouldn't comply. My mother couldn't stand the brutality, and she quickly devised a plan. She approached him and offered to organize the work groups for him on condition that he would not assault the women. Then she got the women to agree to a roster system that she set up, enabling the very young and the very old not to go out to work, and ensuring that the others took turns to have a day off. And it worked. She had a compliant workforce. The most vulnerable people remained in the barracks and recuperated. The camp leader took note of her skills, and she earned his grudging respect and gained a little bargaining power. Step by step, she succeeded in taking some control of an untenable situation and making it a little better for everyone. The women who remained in the barrack each day helped with the cleaning. My mother established a relationship with the kitchen staff, which enabled her to access coal and wood, so that the barracks were a little bit warmer when the women came home from working in the freezing exterior, and there was some hot water to drink. My mum explained that survival was due mostly to chance. She estimated that this accounted for maybe 90% of survival. But the other 10%, what you did with the chance that you were given, was up to you. I believe that my mother influenced that 10% with her innate strengths. She was brave, she was not afraid to confront authority, and her ability to converse with her captors in their language gave her a subliminal advantage. And she used these skills to help others to survive as well. Early on, she recognized the importance of connectedness. She instinctively knew that friendship and belonging helped to overcome the dehumanization the Nazis sought to perpetrate. During this time in the camps, she gathered around her a group of about 10 women who became her friends. She talked about them as her girls or her adopted daughters. They looked out for each other. They made sacrifices for each other, and they survived together. This photograph is taken of my mom and her adopted daughters at Bergen-Belsen 10 months after liberation, where they all survived. And this photo is an incredible gift that they made for her. It's a handmade book. Each page is a handwritten tribute to her, presented to her by her girls for her birthday on the 5th of July 1945. The cover of the book is made from a Canadian Air Force uniform. The inside cover is adorned with pressed and fabric flowers. This is incredible evidence of the role she played in their lives. At this point, I'd like to tell you 3 short stories, 3 incidents that illustrate this incredible relationship they had. One of her girls, a teenager, was smaller and frailer than the others and struggled to make it through the 24 hours between one meager meal and the next. As the day wore on, she would faint from hunger. Now, any evidence of weakness was almost certain to lead to extermination. If her fainting was ever observed by the Blitzwoman or another Nazi official, she would almost certainly have been sent to Auschwitz. And my mother knew this, and so she devised a plan to save her. She gathered the others in the group, and she arranged for each of them to retain a little of their daily ration of bread in order to give it to the girl during the course of the day and prevent her from fainting. Imagine the selflessness for somebody who received watery soup and 1/10 of a loaf of bread as their only sustenance each day to give some away. It was a huge sacrifice, but they all complied, and because of their amazing generosity, this girl survived. The second story that illustrates the same incredible generosity occurred when they were transferred to Stutthof, which was a staging point before they were moved to a new concentration camp near Hamburg. They noticed a young girl who had been brought from another camp, who'd been pulled aside and was waiting for transportation to extermination. The group made a decision to try to save her. This is my mother's description. So we, the Kovner girls, got together. What were we going to do about it? We couldn't simply let her die. A Russian lady was in charge of watching the selected group of doomed inmates. She was looking after them until they were to be deported. We still had something hidden, a chain, a watch, someone had a ring, we had some money, so we decided to put together a parcel. I approached this woman, as I could speak Russian, and I told her what we would give her if she would take out this little girl for us. And she did. She brought me that little girl, and I paid with what we had for her. We took the child back to the barrack where we were, and she became one of our girls. Sayala was her name. She wasn't so little, she was 14, but she looked like 10. Until the end of the camps, she remained with me and became my adopted daughter. The third story shows the reciprocal nature of the relationship. This is the story where my mother's life was saved by the actions of her adopted daughters. After a short time in Vivera, my mother became ill with typhus, and she was sent to a so-called medical facility. This in itself was a miracle, since most inmates of the camps who became ill were simply sent to Auschwitz. But she'd earned the respect of the Nazi camp leader, and he ordered that she at least be given the chance to recover. There was no medical care, but there was a visit from a Jewish doctor and nurse every day. Most people died in that facility, but my mother somehow recovered. Before she was well enough to leave the facility, however, the camp was closed to avoid the approaching Russian army. The staff and occupants were ordered to move to a new camp. The patients in the medical facility, including my mother, were wrapped in their thin blankets and thrown outside onto the snow and left to die. But her friends had not forgotten her. At great personal risk, 2 of them came to find her, bringing clothes with them. They dressed her, and they carried her between them, dragging her to the place where the rest of the camp had been assembled for transfer to the new location. They slipped her into the line with the healthy inmates, supporting her as they marched in groups of 10, so it looked as if she was walking. One of her friends, the nurse, pushed her unseen into a train carriage filled with medical equipment and locked her in. And in this way, against all odds, she survived. Finally, on the 15th of April 1945, Bergen-Belsen was liberated by the Allied forces. After liberation, my mother remained in Bergen-Belsen displaced person camp for almost a year, working first as the secretary to the commanding officer of Bergen-Belsen, and later establishing and running a kosher kitchen with a few of her adopted daughters for about 300 women who remained in the Bergen-Belsen camp and wanted to eat kosher food. There was relative security in the displaced persons camp. My mother had around her the support network of her adopted girls, but she needed to start her life again. And the transition was extremely difficult. Only when the inmates were free did the true scope of their loss become real. She had lost everyone and everything. Her parents, her younger brother and sister, her husband, her child, her mother-in-law, her friends, her home. All her possessions, but she never ever lost the essence of who she was. She retained her humanity and her morality throughout that time. And then she went on to rebuild her life and live it to the full with an amazing sense of optimism and determination. After 10 months in the displaced persons camp, my mother was ready to move forward. She had traveled to Europe for a short time, looking for her husband, hoping against hope that he was alive. But she eventually had to accept that he had not survived. She looked at various options for her future. There was an illegal immigration to Israel that appealed to her sense of Zionism. She had family in the United States who reached out to her. But she eventually decided to join her older brother in South Africa. At the time, South Africa was not accepting Holocaust survivors, but she had a cousin who was an influential lawyer there, and he managed to arrange a temporary visa for her, and she was, in fact, the first survivor to arrive in South Africa. Shortly after arriving in South Africa, after an initial physical and mental breakdown, where she spent 3 months in hospital, her resilience resurfaced. She enrolled for university, she got a job, she rented an apartment on her own, and she met my dad, whom she married in April 1948, 2 years after arriving in South Africa. She went back to university and she studied. She attained 4 more degrees over her lifetime, the last one being a PhD in Holocaust literature at the age of 73. She had 2 daughters, my sister and me, and in time she had 5 adored grandchildren whose lives she influenced profoundly. She emigrated to Australia in 1990, and she lived a full life in Sydney until she passed away in 2000 at the age of 86. But despite building a new life for herself, her fundamental identity was that of a survivor. She justified her survival and her determination to live by a self-imposed obligation to share her experiences with everybody, and this remained the central force in her life. After my mum passed away in 2000, I found in her apartment a remarkable collection of items, wonderful and important evidence of an incredible life. There were amazing documents from the time of her liberation from Bergen-Belsen, newspaper articles of her university achievements, photographs, writing, lecture notes, audio and visual interviews. She was an avid educator. She took every opportunity to talk about the Holocaust to whoever would listen. She gave countless interviews. She was a guide at Holocaust museums in South Africa and in Australia, and a living historian in numerous school programs. She immersed herself in Holocaust studies, trying to make logical sense of this inexplicable trauma. She truly embodied the Holocaust, physically, emotionally, and academically. My mother had always spoken openly about her experiences. As her children, we were always aware of her loss and her sad past. We absorbed her experiences through all our senses into the core of our beings. Her past, our heritage, was always chillingly there. But it was only 6 years ago, 15 years after her death, that I began to really listen to the many interviews she had given over her life and read the documents that related not only to Holocaust experiences, but her active involvement in Holocaust education for the remainder of her life. And only then did I truly appreciate how exceptional she was. I became awestruck by her resilience, by her incredible belief in what was important. I was stunned by her sense of morality that dictated the decision-making and tenacity that ensures that this dark chapter in history would never be written by Holocaust denialists. And as I worked through her writings and I listened to her words, the essence of my mother crystallized. And her mission to perpetuate the memory of those who couldn't tell their stories became my mission too. And so the book, the story of my mother's amazing life and passion, was born. I guess by now you're starting to get a sense of the person my mother was. I could go on for hours telling you of her amazing attributes, her bravery and courage and loyalty, her coping skills, and her empathy towards others, her incredible sense of self, her stubborn determination to live against all odds, but always in the context of morality, never at the cost of another inmate. Her amazing pragmatism and enduring optimism. But we've run out of time. So let me leave you with a quote that depicts in my eyes the hero that my mother was. The amazing woman who was not just a survivor, but so much more. She said, "Every hour of our life, to live an extra hour under those circumstances, this was courage, this was heroism. We couldn't do anything," I can't read this. "We couldn't do anything to our murderers, to our enemies, but at least we tried to defy them by trying to want to live." Thank you.
Thank you, Rochy, for that incredibly inspiring presentation. As you say, your mother was an extraordinary person. And you mentioned in your initial comments that she was filled with bravery and optimism. And I just want to digress for 1 second and say that so many survivors have been described that way. And one on our call tonight, Pinchas Gutter. I didn't welcome Pinchas. I didn't see that he had arrived. But I just wanted to say, when I think of Pinchas, I think of bravery and optimism. And I wonder if there isn't a thread of whether those personality or character traits are part of that 10% that your mother so cleverly described of chance is 90. But what gives you that bravery, that optimism, that incredible sense of, I'm going to persevere for another hour and share and to share with the people who in fact, even in those dreadful circumstances, are worse off than I am, more frail, more needy. It's incomprehensible, and yet at the same time, so unbelievably inspiring. So there are questions, and I think we've all been touched to the point where I can't wait to get my hands on a copy of the book, just to be inspired by the thought of a woman being able to pick herself up after what she had endured, and in fact to make such a beautiful life and such a meaningful life, not on so many levels. Building a family again, being, pursuing an academic career, educating people, and yet always living with solid values. So maybe one of the questions is that we've had is, what was the trigger to put down these memoirs and to publish them? And also Tali wanted to ask you about, when did your mum share her story with you and your sister? what was the sort of, at what point in your childhood she, there's also a question about adopted daughters. What came of that group of extraordinary women who she had nurtured and supported.
So
too many questions, but gives you an opportunity to begin.
Well, let me
start. Yeah,
I'll start with the adopted daughters, because everybody asks that question, because clearly it was such an important part of her life. She maintained a relationship with them for the duration of her life. Most of them went to Israel. There is a beautiful photo that she has, that my sister had, of my sister's wedding when she got married in Israel, with all the adopted daughters present at the wedding.
Oh, wow.
So that was an amazing thing. And my mum kept contact with everybody. Obviously, at this stage, they are probably all passed away. They were a little bit younger than her, but not much. I wasn't at my sister's wedding. I was in South Africa at the time. And so I didn't meet any of them. But many years later, I had some communication with one of the adopted daughters, who was also her cousin, and her daughter contacted me, and we've met up in Israel since then. And then earlier this year, Kerry, my daughter, managed to connect with a group of Holocaust second or third generation people, and we met up with a daughter of the little girl that they saved by bartering with the Russian lady, with her daughter who lives in New York, which for me was such an emotional connection. But they obviously all had a soft spot for her, and she had a soft spot for them. And I honestly believe that they all survived because they had
each other. Part of Tally's questions here is whether your sister is as interested as you are. Are you both as consumed with the legacy?
We were. My sister sadly passed away 2 years ago.
Sorry.
And so she never got to see the book. But we always had, my mum never gave us an opportunity not to be involved. So in order to answer the question of when we were told, it was just always part of our lives. From my earliest memory, we knew my mother had a previous history. We knew she had a little boy who had been killed. We knew she'd been married before. We knew about the Holocaust. It was just, she didn't actually ever sit us down and tell us, but she never ever hid it from us. So we grew up with this knowledge that, I must have gone to the cemetery, to the annual memorial from the time I was probably 3 or 4 or 5. It was just what it was. But I do think that I heard her interviews, I heard her lecturing. It was never hidden. It was just part of our background. Now I can't remember any of the other questions.
So the question was, what triggered you to write the book?
Okay. So it was never something that I was setting out to do, but I've always had this knowledge that we had to convert all her amazing information that she'd left into a format that was easier for somebody else to access. There were boxes and boxes of this stuff. And so I started transcribing the audio tapes so that if it was in a visual form, it would have been easier for the children and the grandchildren to read at a later stage. And then it sort of came to me that if I transcribed all the Holocaust stuff, later generations would just get a sense of her Holocaust life. And really, there was so much more. And so that's what prompted the format that the book is in, which is based around her stories and people's stories about her, And the interesting thing was when I started telling people I was writing the book, I got all these, oh, you have to include this and you have to include this story and you must include about her Scrabble, because my mom spoke with a Yiddish accent and she spelt with a Yiddish accent. And, you know, so she'd come up with these beautiful Scrabble words that we'd kill ourselves laughing about. She was such an involved person. And I didn't want her grandchildren and great-grandchildren one day to see her in a single dimension. And so that was a big motivator for the book, to get a complete picture, as complete a picture as you can of her.
There are lots of comments in the chat, Rochy, thanking you for the amazing story and for sharing it with not only us, but for generations to come. And we'll send you a copy of the chat, so you'll be able to engage with all the people who've posted these lovely comments as well. I wondered, having written the book, are there pieces now that you think you need to do the second part, or do you think it's comprehensive and you feel?
Yeah, I think it's encapsulated as much of her as I think I can encapsulate. Perhaps one day other generations will add to it. You know, at the end of the book there is a little section with grandchildren and sons-in-law and people who thought they were her grandchildren but they weren't her biological grandchildren, have all written little stories about what she meant to them. And I guess eventually I will add all the, maybe not in the book, but photos, more photos and more documents. There is a lot of documentation that I have, amazing documentation, you know, passports from Bergen-Belsen.
And do you keep that with you, or do you have it in an archive at one of the Holocaust centers?
I have it all. Okay. And one day it'll have to go to a Holocaust museum. Brisbane is in the process of getting a Holocaust museum. There's Yad Vashem. At this point in time, we're all custodians of her stuff and we don't really want to part with it.
I understand, but I'm sure at some point. I'm interested to ask a question. What has, I'm sure that it hasn't stopped for you with the publication of the book. Where has this publication taken you, Rochy, and what are you doing with it?
Yeah, so it's given me the courage, I think. I think it's given me the courage to talk about her, which took me a long time. It took me a long time to be able to talk about my mother without crying, for starters. It's enabled me to keep telling her story more easily, and I've got involved with education in a sense. There are programs in Australia that I'm involved in. There is a beautiful program called Courage to Care, where you can use a Holocaust survivor's story, or in my case, my mom's story, as a starting point for a conversation with students, school students, about becoming an upstander, not a bystander. And I've got involved with that, which I'd always wanted to do, but I didn't ever have the courage to do until I'd written the book. I've done quite a lot of presentations internationally about the book, and just for me to be able to promote her story and to perpetuate her mission, really, it's become a big part of my life.
Interesting. Michael Kaplan's asking, what would she have thought if she'd seen the book? Would you have a sense of that?
I think she would have been very proud of it. The book has actually got a lot of her writing in it. I've tried to give her a voice, her own voice, in addition to narrating it. I think it's mostly from her perspective. She was, I think there might be parts of it, perhaps a bits about my dad, which she would have felt were too personal, that they should have been contained. But I didn't want to give a sense of her without all the people she impacted on. And my dad was, a big part of her post-Holocaust life, obviously. So I would hope she was proud of it.
I'm sure she would be extremely proud. But I was also wondering whether, I suppose, being in the public domain, she was used to that. So I think
it was all her story.
Yes.
I didn't bring anything in that wasn't her story, except perhaps the bit about my dad, which she might not have been comfortable to have out there. But
her son, or were you able to engage with her a little bit about her marriage?
It was not really. We always knew Michael was, had been her boy. In the photos we have of him are of a baby, and so to me he was always a baby. He was just her son, who was a little boy really a baby in my head, who had died. And then a couple of years ago, I was contacted by a cousin of hers and us, who said, can you give me some information about your mother's son, because I'm wanting to put his name forward for the commemoration of the children at Yad Vashem. And her comment was, I've forgotten his name, but he and I were the same age and we played together in Kovna Ghetto.
Wow.
And that killed me, because she took this abstract baby and turned him into a person who played, who was old enough to play. But that was many years after my mum had died, but it changed my whole perception of him. It's interesting that my youngest granddaughter's second name is Michaela, and also my oldest nephew second name is Michael. So this child is perpetuated in two further generations, with meaning. The children will eventually, certainly my oldest nephew knows exactly why his second name is Michael, and I'm sure my little granddaughter will one day know that.
Wow, incredible. Interesting, as I said, there are so many beautiful comments, deservedly, about this incredibly uplifting and inspiring, as one person referred to it, a life-enhancing presentation. Zola Schumann is the daughter of two survivors, and both her parents were survivors, and she's put here that she created a website dedicated to my parents' survival and posted all their documents and photos, and something that she's encouraging second and third generation family members to do, which I thought was alongside or independent of a book. So that's food for thought and for others, obviously, to consider. I just wondered if anybody else had any particular comments. I know that many of Rochy's friends are on this webinar this evening. If you would like to maybe open your mic and just say hello. We have a few minutes. Most people, and Leslie Greenbaum here, who I referred to earlier, who used to speak of your mother so warmly, says, "Dearest Rochy, your book captures the essence of your wonderful mother, inspiring."
Thank you.
If anybody would like to open their microphone, and well done for the work that you're doing in Holocaust education, the 3 centers in South Africa, in Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban, as you know, are actively involved in mainly education. And survivor testimony is an incredibly powerful, the most powerful form of tool and resource that we have, and to have that as a survivor story in your family and as your mother's story, I'm sure you're making a wonderful impact amongst those people that you're working with. Tally's now asking, how much research did you do or had you to do about the camps and the ghetto, particularly Estonia? I'd be interested to hear a little more about that.
Very little, really. I took everything from her testimony. So it was all the documentation she had left. She did a lot of interviews, and I took 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 audio interviews, and I took the material that was rewritten again and again and again, so that I knew that was what was important to her. I didn't research the campsite much. I just took it on her face value. whatever she'd said, to me, that was what I wanted to get out there.
Okay, and just to make sure that the audience know that the book is also available on Kindle and through Amazon. We did obviously mention a few times that it's available physically to purchase through the Durban and Johannesburg centres at their cafes. Cape Town, we'll be able to send books to Cape Town to anyone who would like them, but also Kindle and
it is on Amazon, but it's quite difficult to get in South Africa, I believe, which was why I had it printed there.
We're very thrilled that we're able to distribute the book, and you said that Linda Sandler has also been helping you with distribution, so that's amazing. So Pinchas Gutte, who I welcomed warmly earlier, asks, how can one obtain your book so I can share with other survivors here in Canada? Yeshua. And I think we just mentioned that, and Kindle and...
Yeah, so internationally it's available on Amazon.
Okay. It's also at the Gitlin Library in Cape Town. I'm sure there's going to be a long queue for learning it at the Gitlin Library. Rochy, this has been thoroughly inspiring hour. We've been privileged not only to have a taste of your wonderful mum, the incredible sensitivity that you've applied in, publishing her story and giving her a voice, as you said. I'm sure many of us are going to look forward to reading the book avidly, and we look forward to keeping in touch, especially as you're involved in Holocaust education as well in Brisbane. We look forward to keeping in touch through that mechanism as well.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It's really very important to me.
It's been important for all of us. Thank you so, so much. If there's nobody who would like to open their microphone and have any communication with Rochy, we'll leave you. Yes?
This is Ken Springer.
Can I just say something? Is it possible to have a link of this talk that I listened to, which is quite extraordinary, everything that you've done, so that I can actually send it, because I don't think very many people get this link or listen to the Durban Holocaust museum, and so if I could get the link, I could actually send it to quite a few of the survivors here in Toronto, and they can participate in listening to you. And so I would like to thank you very much for what you've done. And of course, I'm going to get the book and I'm going to share it with others, certainly with my family.
Wonderful, Pinchas. We'll definitely make sure you get the recording and make sure you can distribute that. And it's always so wonderful to hear your beautiful voice and hear you that you're part of our webinars always. It's just very special. And I know that you're aware that we are engaged with Pinchas through Dimensions and Testimony and Education in all three centers as we speak. So Pinchas, you're with us all the time.
Thank you, and it's lovely to see you. I always get a lot of pleasure of seeing all my friends, which I can't see, be there, but at least I can see you on Zoom, and that's really fantastic.
Wonderful to have you with us. Thank you. And I interrupted Ken. Sorry, Ken, if you would like to carry on.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Rochy, I'm sure you remember the good old days at Wits Medical School some many decades ago.
I absolutely do. I can't see you anymore, but I've obviously got the view wrong. Hold on. Let's get perhaps. Oops.
Probably won't recognize me. It's a long time ago.
I can see you now. It was a very long time ago. It was a very long time ago.
Yeah, but congratulations. It's really good to see you and to hear you. And it sounds like you've done a fantastic job on the book, and I really look forward to reading it.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us tonight.
It's been great. Thank you very much.
Can I please say something?
Yes, of course. Estelle.
Hi, I'm Estelle Chazen from Ranana, Israel, South Africa. And I just want to ask you, because I want to know if there's something in the way kids are brought up, because you have some people who come out so strong and so whole, and even stayed whole, really emotionally and morally whole through the whole trauma and ghastly experience. And then other people who just collapsed, who just even after the show, I never recovered emotionally from it. And yet your mom stayed so whole. And I want to know if it's something about perhaps where they were brought up, or if it's just something in the personality of the person. If you have any kind of idea, how different people turn out. That's
Any thoughts, Rochy, on how you think your mum was able to?
I think some of it was innate. She was an innately strong person. She was very optimistic. She was very determined in everything she ever did. And I think perhaps, I think she was I think her language helped her. The fact that she could address everybody in the language that they spoke, I think it gives you quite an advantage. She spoke to the German officers in German. She spoke to the Russian lady in Russian. She spoke to the Yugoslavian guards in Yugoslavian. And it changes the way people see you, I think, when you speak the same language that they do. But I think innately, it was her innate strength. I think she was also brought up to have a lot of self-confidence, a lot of belief in herself. And I think part of her desire to survive was a way to get back at the Nazis. Because the only thing she had left was to survive despite the fact that they didn't want her to.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for a very moving talk. Thank you.
Just to reassure everybody, all the participants, in fact, all of the registrants for this evening will receive a copy of the link of the recording. In the coming days, by the end of the week, you will receive the link to the recording of tonight's session. Thank you so much, Rochy, and thank you all for joining us. It's been a very special evening, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, Mary. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rochy. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Rochy. Thank you, Mary and Tally. It was really wonderful, Rochy. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And travel safely back home.
Thank you.
Hi, Roch. It's me. It's Hani here.
Hi, Han. Thanks for
How
being
you doing?
here.
I've heard your talk 3 times already. I have a book,
know.
and each time you talk, it brings her back to life and about our wonderful friendship that we had in Benoni and remembering your mother so much with love.
Thank you for always being there.
My pleasure. Love you.
Bye.
Yeah.